Welcome to QuietScare, where horror doesn't scream, it whispers. There's something to be said for the things that go bump in the night, the ones that don't make a lot of noise, the ones that find you when you're sure you're safe. These stories are about the real moments when that quiet dread shows up, from people who found themselves in a place where the world felt just a bit off. They're a collection of true accounts about what happens when that thin boundary between your life and something else is crossed. The moments of dread are subtle: a knock, an odd sound, a shadow at the window. The tension comes from the slow, creeping realization that a person or a presence is watching and waiting. So go ahead and get comfortable. Maybe put in some headphones. The lights are low. The air is still. A like and a subscribe really helps the channel. Also, consider hitting the bell notification so you know when a new episode comes out. The first 10-15 minutes of the episode will contain ads, but after that there will be no more interruptions, so you can get off to sleep. Sleep well and dream dark. The air inside always smelled like citrus peel over old leather. A clean note stretched thin across the hours. I was 19 and not very tall, starting nights at a private club off a busy strip in Los Angeles. The place was polished and loud in a way that deadened the time, with men in pressed shirts and watches that caught the dim light. No women came in unless they wore the uniform and carried bottles. I told myself the money made sense. I told myself I was safer when I stayed alert. On breaks, I went out back where the ash smell thinned. 2 metal benches sat near a loading door, where delivery trucks backed in twice a week. A backlot you see everywhere. Just enough light to see faces, not enough to read a badge. A line of hedges didn't hide anything, just marked where the concrete ended. I would sit, scroll my phone, drink from the plastic cup they gave us for water. If I timed it right, I could have 12 minutes of quiet before the bass found me again. That night, a car pulled in wrong. Nose angled toward the benches where staff smoked. It was new and dark, polished hard enough to hold the streetlights. It had a New York plate on the front. We didn't see many of those. A woman stepped out steady on thin heels. She looked built for bright places. Clean hair, a neat dress, an expensive bag you wore like permission. People like that didn't come to our door, not unless they worked. She came close and smiled like we were already acquainted. She said she needed help. Some change had slipped down into the car and her fingers couldn't reach. She asked if I could lean in and pick it out. My break was done anyway. I told her I could get one of the bouncers, that they'd be happy to help, and I pointed toward the door. She waved it off. Soft voice, quick smile, a little tilt of the head like it was nothing. She said it would take a second. She tipped the key fob in her palm like a coin she meant to vanish. I said I had to go. I apologized. Not because I felt sorry, just because the word took the edge out of things and I went inside. At the back bar, I told 2 girls I liked that it was odd, that there was a woman in a car asking for help with loose change. They made faces and said they'd stick to the front door for smoke breaks. So we all nodded at each other in that way you do when you're pretending something is just peculiar and not wrong. I drove home after close with my throat scratchy from cigar smoke. My apartment was on the first floor of a building that had been painted a cheerful beige at some point and never touched again. It wasn't gated. The windows in the front looked over a narrow parking lot. At night, the glass threw my reflection back, and beyond it, the lot lights made pools on the concrete. I owned a couch that dipped where I always sat, a small table with watermarks, and a dog bed I meant to fill when I could afford a dog. I kicked off my shoes, opened my laptop, and let my body come down from the shift. I had maybe 20 minutes of uneventful. Then a hard white blink struck the glass, the kind a phone makes when it's too close. The room went flat for a second, and the blind cord tapped the sill once like a metronome. My stomach tightened in the space between knowing and admitting. I went to the window with my hands up, and there it was in the lot, that same dark car. The shape I recognized from the angle of its hood and the plain rectangle of the plate. It sat still. I stood still. They could see me, if they were looking. My face was there on the glass. I pulled the blinds down fast enough to rattle the slats. and left one strip crooked so I could look out sideways. The gap felt safer than open glass. I stepped back and made myself smaller. I called the police. I gave them my name, my address, my floor, the make and color of the car, the plate detail. I told them about the flash. They told me someone would come. I held the phone and watched the blinds as if they could tell me anything. The car idled, or I imagined it idled. It was hard to tell with the blood in my ears. The officer showed up in about 15 minutes by my kitchen clock. Not fast, not slow, just the kind of time where a person can decide 3 different ways what to do and still do none of them. They walked the lot and asked me to describe what I saw. I pointed through the blinds and told them again. By then the car was gone. They recorded it and said to call if anything else happened. Their radio crackled once in the hall, a small sound that seemed to hang around after they were gone. Their shoes squeaked a little on the entry tile. I remember that. When they left, the room felt larger and thinner at the same time. I kept working. It was easier to say that to myself than to make the other decisions. I bought a can of pepper spray at the drugstore and carried it in my uniform pocket. I parked under the brightest light and took pictures of my own car when I came home, as if documenting would make me harder to move. I started keeping the blinds closed most nights and slept with my phone under the pillow. Small adjustments. The shape of my life bent around them. 2 weeks after the flash, I took my new German Shepherd to the pet store. I'd adopted her the week before, from a man who said he was moving and didn't have time anymore. She leaned into my leg the way some dogs do when they want you to know you're a pair. She calmed me because she had a job and did it well. We were in an aisle of bulk treats and chew toys when I saw a woman cross at the end, the movement familiar like a song under another song. The hair was the same, the dress a close match, the bag the same shape and shine. The exactness of it flattened a lot of thought. I did not walk toward her. I made sure the dog saw her and stood between us. The woman did not look at me long. Maybe she glanced down, maybe she didn't. She walked past and kept walking. I breathed through my mouth until my heart slowed, one of those small tricks I'd taught myself when I couldn't change what was happening. I watched her leave and counted to 30 before I went to the register. The dog sat, then stood, then sat again, picking up my nerves like scent. When I reached my car, a folded square rode the wiper, paper thin as a receipt. My hand shook more than I wanted. I took the paper off and got inside, and locked the doors and then unfolded it with my thumbnail. Inside, neat print said they might have clipped me, a number to call. The paint showed no scuff, the plate no bend. I put the paper in the glove compartment and drove home. I didn't call the number. I did call the neighbor I knew best, and told him what I had seen, what I had found, the way the note didn't fit the facts. He was retired and liked to watch the lot in the evenings from his porch with a soda. He said he would keep an eye out, said he always did, and I thanked him. A day later he knocked and asked if I was seeing anyone, as if he were passing along gossip. He said someone had asked about me. Casual voice, casual shrug, like it was innocent. I told him no. We both knew that wasn't the point. There were voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize, the kind with long emptiness and then a sound like someone breathed close to their phone. Sometimes the recordings were mostly room noise, the small electrical hush a microphone makes when it's listening too hard. Sometimes there were words, soft and not quite clear on the edge of probable. Sometimes there were small things I wouldn't have looked at before. Tissues on the hood of my car, a dark smudge near the handle, a leaf stuck under the wiper, though there were no trees overhead. I got good at deciding what mattered and what didn't. I got good at measuring my panic into doses I could live with. In the evenings, I walked the dog around the block. We didn't go far because I didn't want to be away from any door I could control. She would stop and lift her nose, attentive to whatever we couldn't see, and I'd stand and let her read it, then tug us along. I carried her training like a small private shield. One night we passed a group of kids chalking hearts near the laundry room door, and one asked if he could pet her. I said yes because I wanted to watch something normal happen with my hands empty. I moved apartments once after that, farther from the club, 1 floor up. a gate that actually closed. I changed my route enough that it took time to make a habit. I took my breaks in a different spot at work when I could, behind a pillar where the cameras could see me. I told new girls about the woman with the out-of-state plate, how she smiled and asked like it was nothing. I told them they could say no without a reason. I told them they could say no even if the person was polite. You learn it's easier to sell that advice to other people than to use it. 3 years is longer than I thought. A shape like this could hold. The exact face stopped showing up, but the trace of it kept announcing itself in small, ordinary ways. A car idling 2 spaces away with the headlights aimed down. A text to a number I didn't recognize with my name spelled right. A white blink somewhere behind a blind. When nothing followed, the absence of the next thing became the next thing. Sometimes I would think of the change in the car and the way you could lose something small and then go looking for a hand to reach it. And I got angry again. Not because of what almost happened, but because of the theater of it. People will tell you to ignore it, which works for the hours you manage to do it. People will tell you to be careful, which you already are. People will tell you to get a gun, which I did not. What I did was layer the simple things. A second deadbolt. A stick in the window track so the blinds didn't flare when a car turned in. A cheap motion light that sometimes caught only moths. I made a long, slow fence out of small axe. A new pair of blinds that closed tight. A peephole cover. A neighbor's number taped inside the kitchen cabinet. A habit of changing shoes at the door so it looked like more people lived with me. There's a window near my desk now that faces a louder street. And in the mornings I let the blinds sit a finger width open, so the sun can mark the floor. On better nights, I leave the phone face down, make tea, and scratch the dog's chest until her eyes go soft. Some nights, I walk her a little farther, past the corner store and back, and I wave at the man who stands under the neon with a broom. He started calling my dog by a nickname he made up. She likes him for the way he never reaches until she leans. The club is behind me. The woman with the expensive bag has gone to wherever people like that go when you're not there to notice. But every now and then, a car with an out-of-state plate pulls up at a red light, and I feel my breath shorten and then settle. I check the mirrors. I check the locks. I pet the dog's ear once with my knuckle, and then I drive home. I grew up in a small house where the walls were thin enough that you could talk to each other without leaving your bed. We were in a 1-story rental on the dry side of town, the kind with a swamp cooler and flimsy interior walls. A few blocks off the main drag, the nearest landmark anyone knew was the discount grocery on South Avenue. Nothing precise enough to point to our door. We knew each other's habits by the way sound moved. My dad clearing his throat before he spoke. My cousin laughing with her mouth closed. Me tapping a fingernail against the headboard when I couldn't sleep. Air from the cooler edged along the floor. A thin current you noticed only at your ankles. That night we were passing words from room to room in short pieces, like tossing a ball in the dark. I was about 8. It was late enough that the street outside had gone quiet. The house felt like a held breath. The knocking came in between sentences, a slow, deliberate sound and low. It wasn't at ear height. It was down near the floor, padded and patient, as if the knuckles were set just above the threshold. I thought at first I had misheard and waited for another knock to place it. My cousin stopped mid-sentence. From my dad's room there was a pause, that throat clear swallowed back. Then it came again, louder, still from near the bottom. The angle of it seemed wrong. My cousin sat up on the futon at the foot of my bed and looked at me, eyebrows up. She had this habit of rolling her eyes when she was scared, like she was trying to chase the fear off with annoyance. My dad's door clicked. His feet crossed the hall and stopped. "Don't open the door," he said. His voice was flat and firm, the voice he used when he wanted you to think a thing was serious. I sighed the way kids do when they think adults are putting on a show. My dad sometimes tried to spook me for fun. He used to say there were big eyes outside my window staring in, and I'd wake up certain I could feel them through the glass. He would draw the curtains himself and tell me to sleep, and I would watch the outline of his shoulders leave a notch of the hallway light. He thought of that as a kind of game. I had decided I was done with being the one who jumped. My cousin slid off the futon and bumped the frame with her knee. A small thunk, then set her feet on the carpet. She took one step toward the hall and then another. Light on her toes like that would make any difference. The hallway smelled faintly of laundry detergent. Air from the swamp cooler thinned into a draft at the front of the house. She went down the short hall. 4 steps, the thermostat under her hand. I followed her to the doorway. My dad was already there in the hall, planted with his hand against his doorframe like a brace. "Don't open it," he said again. "If you open it, you invite it in." There was a little space of quiet after that. Not dramatic, just the 3 of us breathing, and something on the other side of the door not breathing in any way we could hear. I wanted to be the kind of brave that doesn't need an audience. I wasn't. I felt my stomach tighten and my mouth go dry. I told myself to go back to my bed and not look. My cousin moved anyway. She went past the framed school picture in its cheap silver frame, past the thermostat with its little plastic slider. The door had a narrow pane of glass set to the side with a thin curtain over it. She lifted the edge of the curtain with 2 fingers and leaned in, shoulders hunched. She gasped and flinched back fast enough to bump into the shoe rack. One of the sneakers slid and thumped onto the mat. Her hands were up at her mouth. She didn't say anything. She shook her head once. Quick, like she could rattle loose what she'd seen and be rid of it. It felt as if the house leaned with her, as if everything inside shifted an inch away from the door at once. "What?" I said. I heard my voice too loud in the small space. Curiosity ran ahead of fear and dragged me with it. "Don't." She reached toward me and then dropped her hand without touching. She had this habit of chewing the inside of her cheek. I saw the faint dent appear beside her mouth. "Just don't look." I moved closer anyway. I put 2 fingers to the curtain where she had held it and eased a strip of fabric to the side. The glass was cool against my forehead where I leaned in to get an angle. The entry lamp we kept on was a weak yellow that made shapes look watered down. It pooled against the small concrete slab and the doormat with the worn-off welcome. An extremely short woman stood a foot from the door. I thought woman at first because of the long black hair that fell down and split at the center, a seam showing the flatness of her face beneath, but it didn't sit right to call her that. Her skin was pale enough that it almost had no color, as if light went in and had nowhere to settle. What I could see of her eyes through the gap in the hair was only the whites. There was no glint, no dark center to catch. She stood too close to the slab, toes nearly on the seam. The entry lamp flattening her into 2 colors, hair and not hair. Her arms were stretched down and back, longer than the rest of her, longer than her legs, longer than her torso. They hung like something poured and set, wrists turned so the knuckles faced inward toward the door. The tips of her fingers looked like they might graze the concrete if she leaned. She was too still. I realized I had stopped breathing. I waited. The moment right after I saw her was a tight-ringed thing. I heard the sound the swamp cooler made when it kicked up a notch. I felt a small bead of sweat slide from my hairline into my eyebrow and sting. I smelled the dust in the curtain. My throat seemed to close the way it does when you drink water too fast and it tries to come back up. I didn't think a word like help or monster. I thought low. I thought wrong. She moved in a sudden jerk that stole what air I had. It wasn't a run the way I understood running. It was a bad imitation of running. It made no sound I could hear. It was as if she hadn't remembered what to do with her legs until that second. She went off to the right, an unsteady side-heavy motion, her arms dragging behind, not swinging. The hair didn't bounce. It just slid with her like a cloth stuck to a face. I started to pull back from the glass. Before I did, she cut a half circle and turned back. There was a jagged stutter in the way she came around, a hitch in one hip or knee. She faced the door again, and though I still couldn't make the pupils out under that sheet of hair, I knew she had me in the narrow frame of the window. The knowledge came without reason. It set the small muscles in my hands to buzzing. I had the sense clear as if she'd spoken, that she knew exactly what she had done to us, and liked it. Not joy, not malice even. A satisfaction like you feel when you set something in a place you've always put it, and it fits. She seemed to hesitate at the edge of the light, as if a line were there, or as if the light had weight. She paused a heartbeat in that position, not all the way still, as if something inside her didn't agree with stopping. Then she turned again, fast this time, and ran off down the edge of the porch. Her hands trailed at her sides like lengths of rope being pulled. The entry lamp fell short before the steps, and she slid from that half-light into the part of the yard our light never touched. My cousin's breath came out ragged. She shoved the curtain closed with the flat of her palm. The sneaker on the mat was still on its side. My dad hadn't moved from his spot, but his shoulders had risen at some point, the way you raise your shoulders when you are bracing for something to hit. We stood there listening for any sound of feet in gravel or a gate latch. The house went back to the way it was before, in terms of noise, but the quiet had a shaved-down edge to it. Nobody said anything for a while. I was aware of how my bare toes were against the cold of the entry tile, while the rest of me was on carpet. A moth knocked itself against the outside of the lamp cover, tapping light and then dark, light and then dark. From outside, the entry lamp hummed. Something small hit the glass once, maybe the same moth, one knock and gone. My cousin lowered her hands, and I noticed a crescent of dirt under one nail from earlier in the day. Small details came back where they had hardly mattered before. Eventually my dad said, "Lock it," meaning the deadbolt. I slid the chain first out of habit, then set my palm to the door to feel its give, and turned the stiff bolt until it seated. The paint was cool and a little gritty. I tested it with a tug. I wiped my hand down the front of my t-shirt without meaning to, another nervous habit I didn't know I had until that night. We drifted back to our rooms like people do after a bad movie. Everything soft and a little silly looking, and too bright. I lay down and stared at the ceiling where the shadows from the ceiling fan made four long shapes that thickened and thinned as the belt slipped a little and caught. From my dad's room, his throat cleared, only once. My cousin eased the futon back by a few inches, enough that it lined up square with the wall again. When she sat, the frame gave a small squeak we had trained ourselves not to hear. I didn't sleep quickly. Every so often the house made the noise old houses make. Settling, they call it. And I thought of knuckles low against a door. I thought of arms too long dragging along concrete. I held my breath and let it out in a careful stream, tricking myself into calm by pretending to blow out a candle in slow motion. When I finally slept, it was without pictures I could keep. Morning brought the usual bright wash of normal. The sun came and slanted, and the dust in the air looked like it always had. The welcome mat said what it always said, worn down to almost nothing. We didn't talk about it over breakfast. Somebody rinsed a bowl with too much force and splashed the counter, and I wiped it with a dish towel until it was dry because the damp spots made me uneasy. I set the bowls to dry on a threadbare dish towel and lined the spoons so their handles pointed the same way. My dad folded the towel and set it straight on the oven handle. My cousin went out to get the mail, though there wasn't any yet, and came back empty-handed, cheeks flushed like she'd run. Now, years on, I think about how rooms keep the shape of certain nights, even when no one else would know it. The door is different, the mat is different, all the laughable things that made that house ours are scattered. Some nights, I still find myself stepping around the bottom of doors like it matters. I let the thought pass, and let the quiet have the last word. I had been in the apartment for only a week, still learning the shape of the rooms at night. The place smelled faintly of fresh paint and cardboard, and my voice echoed in the kitchen when I called for someone down the hall. That Friday I made a small plan. No party, nothing loud. Just a couple of friends I trusted, some takeout, maybe a board game. I'd graduated in May, signed a lease in August, and by September I felt like I was standing up in my life for the first time. The blinds on the patio door didn't quite reach the bottom. If I stood in the kitchen, I could see a thin stripe of the parking lot through that gap, a narrow piece of outside I meant to fix and never did. Jackie and Brianna knocked a little after 9. They came in with a burst of cool hallway air and 2 bottles of tequila clinking in a bag. We hugged and laughed in that way people do when they've been living parallel lives for a while. We took our shoes off and sat on the floor by the low table, because I hadn't bought proper chairs yet. We ate leftover rice out of the container and poured drinks into juice glasses, and the city through the patio glass looked like a handful of scattered coins. We'd been talking for an hour when there was another knock. I wasn't expecting anyone else. The knock was light, polite. Jackie went still, like she'd remembered something too late. I cracked the front door and saw a girl I didn't know standing there with a small white box tied with a ribbon, the kind you pick up near closing time. She kept glancing at it like she wasn't sure if bringing it was the right move. Her hair was damp from the night air. Before I could ask, Jackie leaned around me and said she was a friend. The girl smiled quick and nervous and told me her name was Vanessa. I looked at Jackie and saw a little plea in her eyes. I stepped back and let the door swing wide. We pulled out Monopoly because it was the only game in the hall closet that wasn't missing all its pieces. The colors of the money looked fake under the warm bulb of the living room lamp. We passed the box lid around to roll dice in it, and whenever someone landed on luxury tax, we made a noise we'd made as kids. While we played, I texted Jackie to come to the kitchen. I didn't want to make a scene. In the kitchen with my elbow against the fridge to keep the door from creeping open, I asked why she'd brought someone I didn't know. Jackie rolled her eyes at herself and said she'd met Vanessa a few weeks back at an event. She said Vanessa had been trying to make new friends. She said the night would be better with more energy. That kind of pitch. I stood at the sink, picked a fleck of paint from my nail, and said fine. Back in the living room, we spread out on the floor. Brianna, who always laughed first, grew quiet when she talked about her mother wanting her to move back home for a bit. She said she didn't know how to tell her she needed space time, really to feel grown. Jackie stared at her phone for a while, then set it face down and said she wasn't doing so hot either. For months I'd thought her relationship was solid, but she told us she'd been seeing someone else, and that her boyfriend had figured enough of it out to walk away. There was a silence after that didn't belong to any of us. I said something small about owning mistakes and fixing what you can fix. Vanessa, who had been watching the board with a careful face, said that was the kind of thing people say to make themselves feel better, and that wrong is wrong. They started a gentle back and forth that had a sharp edge to it, and I put a hand up and steered us away, and then let the movie pick up the weight. We put on Bringing Down the House because it was familiar and didn't ask much of us. Jackie and I sat back on the couch. Brianna sprawled with a pillow under her chest and propped her chin on her hands. Vanessa sat cross-legged by the coffee table, elbows on her knees, watching like she was trying to memorize it. The apartment took on that settled warmth a room gets when people have been laughing for a while, and the air is heavier with it. Jackie and I faced the patio, the couch angled toward the glass, while the others lay crosswise on the rug. A laugh in the movie was rising when the first shot came clean and wrong, and the room split open. It came through the patio glass with a sound like a metal bat striking a lamp, and then the glass webbed and fell, and the sound discovered its true shape. Another followed, then another. For a breath I didn't move. Then I was on the floor. The air had a harsh tang, burnt minerals, match heads. My bladder let go, a hot shame I didn't have the luxury to hide. Somebody screamed. Later I couldn't say who. The blinds snapped and skittered as the slats were cut. The movie kept playing, a bright voice saying something cheerful the room couldn't carry. I saw the couch cushions explode in little storms of foam. Jackie's knee brushed my shoulder as she slid off the couch and crawled, breath high and thin. I kept my face near the carpet, felt grit on my cheekbone, heard my own teeth touch. When I pressed my cheek down, the carpet burned a little. A grit of old salt or sand worked into my skin, and a sliver of glass ticked against my ear each time I breathed. I counted breaths without meaning to. When it stopped, when the silence sat so heavy, I thought it might be hiding something. I told us all to stay down. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. I inched toward the hallway where my phone was charging on the floor. My knees bumped into scattered glass at the edge of the rug. The patio door was no door now, just a dark hole edged with glitter. I called 911. I gave my name and the address and the fact that there had been shots into the apartment and that I thought they were aimed at us. I kept my voice low. I told the girls not to move. Between the operator's questions, there was only the outside, a car door somewhere, tires hissing on wet pavement, and no footsteps near the patio. Nothing that told me whether whoever was out there had left or was just listening. In the seconds between telling the operator things and being told to stay put and wait, I realized I had not given that address to more than 3 people, and 2 of them were on my living room floor. I didn't like the thought. I put it aside. They called out twice at the door and worked the entry slow. Lights held low to keep from blinding us. At the patio, one traced the beam up the frame and into the night, like he was testing how the darkness answered back. Another crouched and picked at the carpet with a pen cap. He said something low to his partner, and I only caught trajectory. The movie on the television had frozen into a cheerful face mid-sentence. I clicked it off and we all flinched at the change. We gave statements. I tried to tell the story like a clean line. There were questions I couldn't answer. Did I know anyone who would want to hurt us? Did any car outside seem familiar? Had there been strange calls? When the questions ended, one of the officers looked at the window and then at me. He suggested I not sleep there that night. He glanced at the girls and then back at me, and said they could give them a ride if needed. I said yes to both. When the last flashlight clicked off and the paperwork thinned, the apartment felt hollowed. I locked the door. Then the deadbolt and the quiet didn't change. They drove the girls home one by one, and I stood in the doorway with a blanket around my shoulders and watched their heads move by the glow of the dash as the car pulled away. I changed my pants and put the wet ones in a trash bag and tied the bag tight. I stood for a moment at the patio opening, kept a respectful distance from the edge of glass, and looked out into the parking lot. I went to my mother's house. Her guest room smelled like lavender from a plug-in she refused to throw away, even when it had long stopped scenting the air. I lay down on the quilt she'd sewn from old shirts. The ceiling fan had a faint wobble at the highest setting that had always worried me, even as a kid. I stared at it and taught my heart how to slow. I don't know when I dropped off. It must have been for an hour or 2. The phone woke me at 4 a.m. I answered without looking. Jackie's voice didn't sound like her voice. It was thin, close to the phone. She whispered my name and then didn't speak for a moment, as if words were a narrow doorway she had to fit through. She said Vanessa had come back with her because the hour felt thin, and they were headed the same way. While the shower beat the tile, the phone lit up once, then twice, with a name she knew and the way a bruise knows touch. She told me it was her ex, the name you don't say out loud anymore, the kind that still shows up in group photos if you scroll back far enough. She said she didn't mean to snoop. She said she recognized the name like a burned finger, recognizes heat. She picked up the phone and saw messages stacked like bricks. How he hated her, how he wanted to put an end to her life, how he pictured it, how she was supposed to send what he needed. The last message from Vanessa was a little after midnight. It was my address, 12:24 a.m., sent with the kind of casual precision that made my throat tighten. I sat up in the guest bed. The quilt slid to my lap. I said nothing for a long moment. I thought of ribboned white cardboard in hands that had texted my address a handful of minutes before the first round broke the glass. Jackie kept whispering, maybe because the house around her was still, or because speaking any louder would have cracked something. She said she didn't know what to do. She said she was sorry for bringing someone I didn't know, for not seeing what she should have seen. I could hear her moving through her apartment in small steps, like there was glass underfoot. I told her to hang up and call the police again, not because everything would be fixed by morning, but because the next right task lay there and not in either of our heads. She didn't answer at first. Then she said okay. She said she was sorry again. She hung up. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling fan until the worry of the wobble felt like old news. The house was as quiet as a held breath. I got up and went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water and held the cool of it to my cheek. On the counter, my mother kept a list of things she meant to remember, written in her tight, careful hand. I read each item and thought of how nothing on that list would ever include my name and an hour in a street, and how that was a gift. I washed my face and changed into an old t-shirt I left there years ago. I thought I might never go back to that apartment. though I knew I would, if only to clean the glass. By the time light came up, the world outside had the same colors it always had. I put my phone face down on the nightstand and sat with my mother at her small table and ate toast, and I let my hands shake while I spread the butter. Later there would be officers and statements and moving trucks and sealed boxes, and I would request the landlord fix the blinds before someone else moved in. Later I would learn to look at a door from the side before I opened it. For now I sat and listened to the clock over the stove find its way from 1 minute to the next. I didn't call Jackie back right away. I waited until the sun threw a square of pale light across the table and made the crumbs shine, and then I wrote down the time, 12:24 a.m., and let the number sit there like a small shard I could see. The light felt even and a little used up, the kind of afternoon that kept its warmth without trying. The sand was packed hard near the waterline, a pale crust over darker wet grit, and it hummed underfoot when the wind came in off the lake. We walked with the tide marks to our left and low dunes to our right, a family line, leaving a shallow stitch of prints that filled with seepage as soon as we moved on. It was one of those afternoons that held on to heat without much drama. My mother carried her sandals and kept pointing out shells. My brother kicked a bottle cap for 20 yards and then lost it in the glare. A gull coasted low, and then thought better of us. The sound of its wings was a dry brush across the air. Up ahead, a pickup sat wrong in the sand. The back end was low, the tail hitch nearly kissing a shallow bowl it had dug for itself. The rear tires were sunk to the sidewalls. When the driver tried the gas, the wheels spun and flung up wet sand that spattered the tailgate. There was another man with him, heavy-set, gray at the temples, sleeves cut at the shoulders. He planted his boots and pushed at the bed while he called out over the engine. Nothing took. They had made a mess of the place. The hole was deeper every time the truck rocked. We were visitors that summer. A long drive to see family in Arkansas, and we ended up on a public beach off the lake because it was a safe way to wear out 2 kids without spending money. The water was brown-green and flat. A skiff cut a track far offshore, and the sound of it came to us late, thin as a zipper. My dad walked over first and I followed with my brother. The air around the truck smelled like wet clay and hot rubber. The driver had a beard that hid his mouth, and his cap was sweat-stained at the brim. He kept flicking his eyes from the hole to the dash like there was a readout that would save him. The heavy-set man breathed through his nose and kept his hands on the metal, a steady set of fingers like a mechanic's. Dad stood near the back corner and squinted at the tires. He said we needed weight over the axle, mostly to himself. Then, louder to the driver, he said we could get in the bed and put weight where it mattered. He tapped the sheet metal with his knuckles. My brother and I climbed up. Dad swung his leg and dropped in after us. The bed was hot against my palms where the paint had faded. Sand had scoured the floor into a dull grit. I remember a loose socket rolling around, and a water jug with the sun caught in it. My mother hung back on the firmer sand, one hand shading her eyes. She had the kind of look people get when they are trying to be agreeable about something they do not like. The foam came up to her ankles and soaked the hem of her shorts. She shifted her weight and raised her chin at us like a question. The driver put it in drive and feathered the gas. The truck made a shallow lurch and settled back into its rut. He looked over his shoulder and lifted his foot. Impatient, he said he needed to hit it harder. The heavy-set man braced himself again and said to give it some. We bent our knees. My brother gripped the rail and grinned like this was a ride, and I did too because he did. My dad spread his stance the way he always did when he expected force to travel through him. When the driver floored it, the engine leapt, and the bed dropped under us with a jolt as the tires bit. There was a wet rip and then we were moving. Sand sprayed out behind us and hit our shins. The truck cleared the hole and kept going. The man at the side let go and hopped back, hands up. I saw his palms marked with black streaks where rubber had left a trace. He was already a step behind and yelled something we couldn't hear. We expected the driver to lift his foot. He did not. The truck gathered speed like a boat finding deep water. The sound changed smoother. The bed vibrated under our shoes. The dunes slid past in a long pale wall. The wind took the heat off my face and filled my mouth when I turned to look. My mother stood where we had left her, a fixed point growing smaller. She had her arm partway out, palm up, like she had been about to say something and thought better of it. The bottles and shells in her other hand clinked together. It took half a second for her expression to catch up with what she was seeing. There was a beat of confusion, and then something else took hold and stiffened her shoulders. My dad banged the flat of his hand against the rear window. The glass was mottled with dust where the wiper didn't reach. He pounded twice, then again, the sound thin under the engine. He leaned to the side and shouted, but the cab swallowed his voice. My brother braced against the rail and looked at me, and I looked at him, and we both found something to hold. We rode like that for a short run that took the place out of my stomach and stretched it. Time went loose as if the empty stretch of beach had no marks to count. The dunes offered the same pale shoulder over and over. Out past them, the water held a ruler straight edge, the kind of line that makes you doubt distance. Something small slid under my shoe, a bolt or a bottle cap, and for a second I felt the bed flex like it wasn't bolted to anything at all, just a sheet skimming the sand. The bed clattered over a rib of harder sand. I thought about the tailgate latch because I had watched my uncle pull one on his farm once, and it had a trick to it. This one had a handle with a black plastic grip, and I knew if it gave under my hand we could tumble out, and I saw my brother's arm, smeared with gray sand where he had touched his face. My father swore and hit the glass again, and then took 2 hard steps to the driver's side and slammed his palm on the sheet metal. He shouted the man's name, though we did not know it, made a name up out of frustration. My mouth went dry. I tasted grit on the back of my tongue. The speed seemed to edge up one more notch before the driver cut it. The brakes shrieked like something startled under a porch. Sand bunched along the tires. We pitched forward and caught ourselves on the rail. My teeth clicked together. The truck came to a stop at a slant, nose pointed at a curl of dune grass. We did not wait for an invitation. We jumped down. My brother hit the ground and stumbled, and almost sat. I landed stiff and felt a jolt in my heels. My dad took 2 quick steps back from the bed and put his body between us and the tailgate because he did that without thinking. He had a streak of dust on his forearm where he had thrown it across the window. The driver stayed in the cab. He kept the engine running. For a second, the 3 of us stood there with the heat of the exhaust at our shins, and the smell of gasoline laid over the salt and wet. The man turned his head a fraction, just enough to glance back, not enough to meet a face. There was a flatness in it. He did not reach for the window. He did not say anything. Then he punched the gas and fishtailed away, found the harder sand again, and kept going. He never looked back. We ran. There was no grace in it. The sand took our ankles. A gull lifted and moved out of the way without really leaving. My brother's sandal folded under and he kicked it off without stopping. I nearly did the same and thought better of it half a step too late. I could hear my breath and my brother's, and the little sounds our feet made when they found firmer patches. My dad did not touch us but stayed close. The prints the truck left were chewed and deep and already slumping at the edges. My mother was where we had left her. She had not chased, which I think now was the right choice. She had seen the way the truck moved and knew not to scatter us all across the length of the beach. She set her sandals down in the damp sand like she meant to plant them. We came up on her and stopped short, which is when my legs went a little weak, and I put my hands on my knees like I was about to be sick, though I wasn't. My brother had a scrape on his shin that already had sand in it. She asked what that was. Small and even. She looked past us down the beach where the truck had gone, as if it had left a trail she could read. My dad shook his head and put a hand to his chest like he had to remind his lungs of their job. He looked at the place the truck had left, and then at us. He mouthed something to my mother that was either "we're fine" or "I'm sorry," and both ended up meaning the same thing. We stood together and watched the truck become a dot and then nothing. It moved toward the curve where the beach slid behind a darker line of trees. The afternoons always had that hour where everything looked washed, and that was when we stood, And that is what it felt like. The water made its small sounds. A kid ran past dragging a stick and did not look at us. The wind fussed with the top layer of sand and set it crawling, a skin that couldn't settle. There were explanations that fit in a box you could hold in your palm. Maybe he panicked. Maybe he wanted to make sure he didn't bog down again and forgot who was back there for a stretch too long. Maybe shame made him keep the engine up, and then shame made him not say anything when he stopped. A man can have a hole inside that turns any trouble into a reflex to flee. I have tried on versions of that, and none rest easy. There were other answers that didn't put you to sleep. The kind that make a person turn her sandals over and over in her hands and look at the water instead of people. We did not say those out loud. We kept to what we could touch. My dad wiped the dust from his forearm with the side of his hand and left a clean stripe that looked like a bandage. My brother tried to pick the sand out of his scrape and hissed when it stung. I plucked a burr off the cuff of my shorts and flicked it away, only to feel it catch on my fingertip again. We quit the beach earlier than planned. Nobody said it that way. My mother pointed at the parking lot and said we should find some water for the scrape. We followed the boardwalk that flexed under our feet. On the way, I saw the heavyset man again, far down the shore, talking to someone else and pointing at the place where the hole had been. He lifted his hand in a small, tired salute when he noticed us. We lifted ours back, the kind of wave you give a person you will not see again. Back at the car, my dad knocked his sandals together to shake the sand. It made a small cloud that drifted under the chassis. He stood for a second with the door open and his hand on the roof like he meant to say something formal, and then changed his mind. We got in. The upholstery held heat and the air smelled faintly of old French fries and sunscreen. My mother twisted in her seat to look at us. We were all there. Years later, I can put a clear picture to the way the bed vibrated under my hands, and the way the lake kept a straight face to all of it. I can tell you what my mother did with her hands and the exact sound the brakes made when the truck stopped. I can tell you the driver wore a cap that had seen horseshoes and the back of his neck had a pale strip where the sun hadn't hit it yet. I cannot tell you why he kept his foot on the gas that long, or why he could not lower the window and use ordinary words. We drove back along the frontage road with the windows down, and the air flattened our shirts against our chests. My brother fell quiet in a way he never did. We passed a bait shop with a sign that had lost its fish, and now just showed a blank hook. At a light, my dad drummed his fingers once on the wheel, and then stopped himself. At the next light, my mother adjusted the rear view by the smallest notch and let it be. Even though it wasn't quite right, my dad rolled his shoulders once like he could set something back into place. We did not talk about it that night with our relatives. It would have come out wrong at their kitchen table with the fan turning overhead and the sound of cicadas hanging in the yard. I lay on the pullout and watched the light from the hallway at the crack under the door. The house had its own motions, and those carried me. In the morning, we went to the same grocery store and bought the same cereal, and went on with the list. There are afternoons that ripple across the rest of your days without fuss. This was one. Sometimes when I see someone load a truck with too much mulch at a home center, I feel the same calculation rise up in me about weight and traction, and then I let it go. If I pass along shore, I look twice at the tailgates. It is not fear so much as the small tilt a life can take when something that did not happen sits beside what did. I hope the man with the cap tries the brake now, when he means to stop. I hope the heavy-set helper keeps a clean rag by his workbench. I hope my brother still has that pale, precise scar on his shin where the sand bit him that day. A mark that says we held on, and then we jumped, and then we ran, and then we stood still. And that was the whole of it. Like a wave that came up, reached our ankles, and then flattened back into the line. Some days started with the sound of a bus kneeling at the curb, and nothing else, like the city had decided to behave. I used to tell people the worst thing about home was how ordinary the violence felt. Most mornings the streets opened like any other city's buses, sighing to the curb, shop gates rattling up, bakery air sweet and warm. Then a word slips into the day, a statistic somebody says once and can't take back, You hear that more people here die from assault than from crashes. You file it away until you can't. You remember what you've seen. I was 17 when I stepped around a man in a charcoal suit face down on a sidewalk where pigeons strutted. His pockets were turned out. A brick lay near him with a marbled smear. My father placed his hand on my shoulder as if we'd come upon a broken water pipe. "Keep walking," he said. We did. By the time I moved back, I knew the city's reputation the way you know the taste of tap water. I rented a room near a petrol station and watched the queue of cars each evening, idling under the harsh lights. The city glittered at a distance, glass towers and billboards, and beneath them ran the corrugations of shacks, more appearing each month like metal tide. A dealership near my bus stop kept a white sports car in the window under its own halo. On the pavement outside, men hawked phone chargers and socks laid on a blanket, the window behind them holding that car like a promise. I'd never go inside. Still, when my friends messaged one Saturday, "Let's go out, let's dress up, let's spend stupid money," we said yes, as if saying no would be some small betrayal of being young here. We split the fare and took a car there. The club had a velvet rope and a bouncer with a bored face and a list. Inside, the walls were blacked out and the ceiling low, strobes cutting the room into brief stills the way heat lightning does a field. The air was a stacked sound, beat upon beat, and we leaned into it. Drinks cost what I earned in half a day. The glasses were heavy and cold. We swallowed. At some point, we stopped calculating how much we had left and kept ordering because the edge had to stay dull, or everything in the room would come into focus again. The men circling, the table light reflected in a puddle of spilled gin. My friend's hair braided tight against her head, the knowledge we would regret this tomorrow. We danced until we lost track of where the floor ended, and we began. We tugged at each other's wrists to keep from getting separated. We shouted without words. By 3, the music loosened and released us. Outside, the air felt like a wet cloth wrung out. We drifted with the stream of people to the edge of the lot where rides came and went. A white van pulled in, headlights dull, the driver lifting a hand to show he saw us. We piled in with the galumphing cheer of people who'd had enough. My best friend took the front bench by the door. The guys slid into the very back, knees wide, laughing at something that seemed funny, then and would not be funny again. I sat just behind her at the sliding door. From my seat by the sliding door, I could see the driver's eyes in the mirror whenever the streetlights hit just right. The driver asked for confirmation. We were the pin on his screen. We nodded, though I didn't look. We just wanted to go home. The city slid past. We should have hit the ramp after a couple of lights. Instead, the van rolled to a slow, patient stop at a four-way. The street looked unfamiliar. A law firm dark as a hollow tooth. A shuttered hair salon. The driver's hands were still on the wheel. The first bang on the window to my right snapped my head around. Then another, palm flat against the glass, the kind of knock someone uses when they're already angry. Cold air threaded through the gap in the seal before the door even moved. A draft that lifted the hair on my arms. The driver didn't flinch. He was looking straight ahead. "Go," the guy behind me said, the word torn into 2 syllables. "Go." The driver hit the lock button and the doors clicked open. The night entered like a breath you hadn't braced for. One man pulled the front passenger door. The other slid the side door so fast it rattled. They climbed in before the van picked up speed again, bodies moving with a purpose that felt rehearsed. Nobody had to explain the roles. The driver's face stayed forward, as if he could outrun what he'd already let in. The cold circle of metal touched my temple like a coin. It sat there with the patience of a weight set on a scale, so slight you could pretend it wasn't there until you remembered what it measured. I remember how exact that pressure was. Not a shove, not a jab, a precise resting, the way you'd hold a level against a wall. "Don't move," he didn't shout. The words were flat and quick. My best friend took a single ragged breath, and then her chest kept trying to pull air that would not arrive. I know the first signs. Her mouth opened and closed without sound. Her eyes were on the floor. I leaned, trying to touch her hand. The gun lifted and came down against my cheek with a dry crack. I tasted metal fled from my gums. "I won't talk," I said, though I didn't say it aloud. I raised my palms and pressed my thigh into hers so she would feel a steady weight. I did it again, small, back and forth, the way you calm a dog during fireworks. The man nearest me started to search us with one hand while the other kept the gun on my legs. His fingers went into pockets, under waistbands, against skin, everywhere a small thing could hide. When the guys in the back spoke up, he hit my knee with the back of the gun. It was a clean hit, a practiced one. I don't know how many times. After the first few, I stopped counting and kept my face still. Each time they protested, I wanted to reach back and put my hand over their mouths. It would only make it worse. When you've watched a city, you recognize the places where words cannot go. He tore my earring. Not a twist. He pulled until the metal gave way and the edges bit. Necklaces snapped, a brittle sound against the engine's hum. He handed what he found to the one in front, who dropped it into a bag at his feet without looking. My best friend's breath came in short chirps, birds trapped in a flue. I curled my little finger, reached until the tip of it found the side of her hand and hooked. We have the same small tattoo there, a shape we picked on a lunch break years ago. A foolish thing then that had weight now. I turned my wrist so the ink would press to hers. She turned her wrist too. My nail had a small chip from earlier. The edge snagged her skin before our ink marks met, and she steadied her hand. For a moment, the sound of her breathing lengthened, as if a door somewhere in her chest had cracked open. The van kept moving through streets that had lost their names. We passed a row of shuttered takeaway shops and a lone pharmacy sign still glowing green. The kind of block that looks the same in any city when the night hollows out. Skylights appeared and withdrew. We passed a billboard with a model laughing at something none of us could see. My cheek throbbed. I thought about the man on the sidewalk in a suit I could only afford in a dream. How the brick lay beside him and my father's hand was warm through my shirt. I sat very still, and in that space stillness felt like the only thing left to do. The driver did not speak. He took turns as if this were a delivery route he'd driven 100 times. 20 minutes, maybe more. Time ran thin and then thick. I pressed my leg against my friend's leg the whole while so she would know I was there. Stupid things came into my head. She hates cucumbers on sandwiches. If they killed her, nobody would know that but me. The van slowed. It rolled into the shadow of a low building. The street was empty except for a cat under a parked truck. 2 coins for eyes in the dark. The man in front opened his door before the van fully stopped, and the other followed him, slipping down and out. They moved fast, practiced again. The driver kept his foot on the brake as if waiting for instruction. He slapped the steering wheel once, a short, angry sound. I slammed the sliding door closed hard enough that the latch clicked and held. "Drive to the nearest petrol station," I said. The voice came out of me like a stranger's. I leaned forward, one hand flat near the horn so he'd know I could make a noise that would bring people. He looked at me then, really looked, as if deciding what I might be capable of. It must have been nothing much. My face hot and swelling, hair stuck to my neck, but for once I didn't blink. He put the van in gear. Under the floodlights, the petrol station looked like a clean stage set. The concrete was swept but slick in spots, diesel rainbowing near the drains. The light made everything look wiped down and false. A cashier stood behind glass, his head turned toward a small television with no sound. 2 attendants leaned against a pillar, arms folded. We rolled in, and the driver hesitated a second too long. I leaned my elbow into the horn. The sound broke over the forecourt in a brittle wave. The attendants turned. My friend folded into me and shook. I told one of the guys to go ask them to call the police, and he stumbled out, his voice too loud when he tried to be controlled, his hands opening and closing at his sides because he didn't know what to do with them. At the mention of police, the driver's face creased in a way I hadn't seen. He started explaining fast. He didn't know them, he had a family. He was just driving, every line worn smooth with use. We stayed in the van with the doors locked because if we got out he would leave, and we needed him not to leave until we decided. The attendant shook his head at my friend by the pump. He didn't have airtime. The cashier held up both hands like a referee. I could see a telephone behind him, heavy and old, its coiled cable gray as dust. "You will take us to the police," I said to the driver. "Quiet, or I will kill you." It was ridiculous. I would apologize to a beetle if I stepped on it, but I said it and didn't look away. He believed the sentence without believing me. He did not want to test the difference. The station nearest us sat in a building where, during the day, people came to renew papers. At night, the lobby light was a stale yellow. We got out as a clump and walked fast. The driver waited until we crossed the threshold, and then reversed so quickly the engine screamed. His license plate flashed in my eyes once, and was gone. I ran to the desk and told the man in the uniform what had happened, and that the driver was leaving, and if he went now we would not see him again. He looked at me and nowhere else. He rubbed under his eye with a finger and said a thing that meant wait. He shuffled papers as if he had things he needed to line up first. My friend slid down the wall and covered her face. The fluorescent lights hummed with the headache pitch. They always have. One of the guys stood with his hands on his hips like he could hold himself together that way. The other one stared through the door at where the van had been. I asked again for them to go after him. A man in another uniform walked in, carrying a bag of crisps, and tore it open with his teeth. He glanced at us and away. After some long minutes, someone said the car would go, but no car went anywhere. Somewhere in the back, a printer woke and clicked, then gave up. The only steady sound was the lights. In the end, I asked to use the phone because I didn't have one anymore, and the man at the desk shrugged and said fine. The handset was colder than the air. I dialed a number that I knew better than my own birthday, and told the voice that answered we needed a ride. My voice sounded normal, which I didn't trust. Most nights the lesson is only that I came home. We waited on a bench and did the thing you do when there's nothing to be done. You wipe at your face with the side of your hand. You fold a napkin someone gives you, and unfold it again. You sit very straight because if you leaned you might not stop. The next day I went back to the station, because I thought there would be a record. I thought the words we had said would live somewhere outside our bodies. The man behind the desk didn't recall, or he recalled and didn't care to recall. The report hadn't been written. There was no case number. Without it, everything was an empty mouth. The company ignored my messages. The driver's face existed for me and not for anyone who mattered. The city continued with its day, a bus sighing to the curb, the car in the window under its halo. People who grew up here laughed when I told them. Not unkind, a laugh that said welcome. They called it an initiation, like I'd been dunked in a cold pool. I hated that. I still do. Yet I catch myself telling it that way now. With the shrug they used, the shrug that means I am still here. Sometimes at the petrol station where I now keep my tank closer to full, an attendant will tease that I'm becoming a local, and I will tip more than I can afford and wish I hadn't, and then do it again the next time. At home, weeks later, I stood at the sink and felt the faint ridge in my ear where the metal had torn. I pressed my thumb to the small bruise that had stayed longer than the others on my knee, as if it liked the bone. When I pressed the bruise, it answered with a small, stubborn ache, like something remembering its shape. I touched the tiny ink mark near my finger and tried to align our hands in memory the way we had in the van, edge to edge, to prove that something held. I don't pretend to have learned anything that helps. This city is what it is because people made it and keep making it. A ladder with missing rungs, and a view worth lying about. I still keep my head down when I pass the dealership window. I still look at the place on the sidewalk where I once stepped around a man who was not a man anymore, and think I should have done something, though there was nothing to do. Sometimes, late, a van like the one from that night goes by my block with a door that doesn't sound right, and I feel my heart rise once and settle again. The kettle clicked off, and I poured hot water over a tea bag and watched the color bleed into the cup until it was dark enough to drink. I grew up in a city where the noise never seemed to stop, so the orange grove felt like a missing piece somebody forgot to build over. The trees were packed tight. rows clipped all the way down to the soil, and at night the air smelled faintly like peel and dust. We went in after dark. I was 15, maybe 16. My two brothers came with me, and my oldest brother's friend met us in a parking lot that had a single busted light humming over the carts. He said the mansion had been empty for years, then almost empty, then a place kids went because there was nowhere else to go. Lately, he'd heard it was different. No one had proof, just talk. We crossed the first run of trees with our heads ducked for no reason. It wasn't a place with rules posted. No one shouted. The freeway noise slid off the leaves and didn't reach us. The air cooled a little between the rows. It smelled faintly like rind. In the city, silence usually meant insulation, good windows, money. In the grove, it meant being swallowed. The grass was sparse, the ground a firm crust. My shoe squeaked once, and I flexed my toes to stop it, and then I kept walking. The chain-link fence looked like it had been there a long time. We dropped to a crouch and went through a ragged oval in the mesh, burrs lifting against our sleeves. On the other side, the rows opened and turned, and then there was nothing but open dark. I guess you don't think of fields at night unless you are standing in one, trying to tell what is solid and what is not. I got excited. I'd been hearing about the place since middle school. Kids daring each other to throw rocks at windows. Somebody claiming to have slept there once without trouble. Another kid saying a guy with a flashlight chased him around the foundation. I moved ahead. It wasn't a decision. My feet just kept going, while the others hung back and joked in low voices. Behind me, they drifted in a loose line. The friend lingered at the edge of the trees, then faded back into the rows like he'd changed his mind, the way people do when they think better of a dare. I heard one of my brothers say my name like a question, but I waved without looking. The clearing went wide, from the corner of my eye. The mansion was a block of absence, darker than the sky. I could make out the line of a roof, and what might have been scaffolding or dead branches stacked against the facade. In front of me, spread across the ground, was a long oval that caught what little moon there was. It looked like water. It had a soft shine to it that made my brain tuck it into a file labeled pond or pool, like the kind rich people installed and forgot. I took 2 more steps toward it, and the shine didn't move like water would when you changed your angle. I got close enough to see the texture. Not ripples, but a crinkled skin. A tarp. I figured they'd covered something, maybe a half-dug hole, or the bones of a fountain. From where I'd stood, it was hard to tell what was under the tarp. Ground that dipped or something they didn't want rained on. The shape could have been big, or just well placed. My foot reached out before I told it to. When my sole hit the tarp, it made a dry crunch. The sound traveled, flapped lightly across the oval, and settled somewhere I couldn't see. Something uprighted itself at the far end. I didn't understand what I was seeing for a heartbeat. A head lifted. The shape was all angles until it wasn't. The dog stood and looked straight at me. It didn't bark right away. It gathered itself first, a pause like the click before a track plays. Then it came over the tarp at a run. I could hear the nails through the material, a staccato beat. For a second I mistook the nails for rain on tin. A thin rattle where there was no roof. The growl came up out of its chest like a held motor finally opening. I turned and ran. The clearing felt twice as big on the way back. My brothers were just beyond the edge of the oval, and the friend who had come last was already gone, the trees swallowing the place he had been standing. I felt a flash of irritation that burned off as soon as my foot hit dirt. My older brother held out one arm, palm back, and let me pass. He had a stick in his hand and a rock in the other. He must have picked them up out of habit. It looked automatic. He didn't say anything. We ran. I could hear the dog behind us, loud when it hit the tarp, then muffled on the ground. I didn't look back. The air felt like it had grit in it. My lungs stung. The rows of trees came up and turned into a kind of tunnel. Branches low and orderly. The leaves brushed our shoulders. Somewhere to our right, the dog barked again. The sound short, then stretched. It wasn't growing quieter, but it also wasn't right behind me, which is the only thing I let myself notice. At the fence, my younger brother dropped to his knees and went first. his jacket snagging on a metal twist. He pulled loose and was through. I went after him and felt the back of my shirt catch for half a second. I waited half a breath for the jolt that didn't come, and felt the fence wire hum against my sleeve. It was just long enough to put a bad picture in my head. The dog hitting me at the waist and both of us rolling into the fence. I pulled free and slid on my palms into the dirt on the other side. My oldest brother stayed on the grove side a moment longer than I liked. He didn't need to do that. He ducked and came through smooth, then stood with the stick held across his body and listened. The dog didn't come to the fence. He barked once more from the clearing, or the sound bounced off something and fooled me. The night settled again, the slow tick of insects coming back into my ears. We waited another 20 seconds like that. I counted without wanting to. 10 numbers past where I thought we'd stop. We made our way back through the trees with our breathing loud and ragged. Nobody spoke. My throat hurt. The rows thinned, and the orange smell gave way to car wash soap and hot asphalt. By the time the fence glare showed through, the hum of the shopping center lot folded back over us. I realized at some point that the friend who'd vanished had doubled back on his own because he thought it was a prank or a cop. When we got to the cars, he was sitting on a curb with his hands jammed into his sleeves, trying to look like it had been his plan all along. He asked if we'd seen anything, keeping his voice as flat as possible. I told him yes. The oldest of us said it was probably a guard, the kind they put on sites to keep kids like us from doing what we were doing. Later, we heard the mansion wasn't abandoned anymore. Someone had bought it, and there were permits on a post, and a tarp stretched over something too big to leave out in the open. I thought about it that night when I tried to sleep. The dog had been right where he was meant to be, doing what somebody told him to do without words. I tried to picture him settling back down after we left, turning 3 times and dropping his head to his paws, the tarp flexing a little under his weight. The house kept its outline in my mind, a blank, square absence, and the loose edge of tarp I had stepped on, and the sound that made like walking on a bag of winter leaves. That's all it was. That's all that happened. Weeks later, I passed the grove in daylight from the passenger seat of my mother's car, and saw how ordinary it looked. Trucks were parked at the edge of the clearing, and there was a sign out front with the name of a company. Under the noon sun, the tarp was a dull slate, no shine to it at all, like it refused to admit what I'd seen. I didn't see the dog. I figured he was sleeping in the shade or being walked around the perimeter by someone in a neon vest. My chest tightened anyway. Sometimes your body remembers before your head does. I still think about the moment before I ran, when I couldn't name what I was looking at. I leaned in, and the shine resolved into a crinkled skin, and the shape at the far end lifted its head. It was a clean switch. Then I ran. I keep my shoes by the door now, and untie them all the way before I take them off. It isn't a rule, just a habit I drifted into and never undid. Most days I don't think about why. On the others, I remember the stick in my brother's hand, the fence catching my shirt, and the oval in the dark that wasn't water at all. I went out a little after midnight because the apartment smelled like onions and laundry soap, and the hallway had that faint warm wiring smell it gets after everyone's run their dryers. The street by my building is wide and usually soft with headlights, and I have this bad habit of treating passing cars like company. I locked the door behind me, took the stairs, and stepped into that thin city quiet you get on a weekday when it's not quite morning and not quite night. A dark van slid into my peripheral and matched me. It was on the far side of the street, drifting slow like it had missed a turn but wasn't in a hurry to fix it. A couple other cars came through on green, harmless and noisy, and I decided not to argue with it. The van would go when the light changed. I cut the corner toward a small food truck lot, the kind that rotates vendors, a wedge of gravel between an auto shop and a few shut storefronts. The strings of bulbs left on like someone forgot them. During the day it's bright and greasy, families and line cooks and pop music from somebody's phone. At night the bulbs float there too far apart to do any real work. The picnic tables sit in the half dark like stubborn furniture after a party. Gravel shifts underfoot. The chain-link fence makes a neat border, the way a fence always makes a promise it can't keep. A man was at one of the black tables. I noticed him because his clothes were dark, and the table was dark, and the hat made a shape that didn't move until his eyes did. He looked up as I passed the edge of the lot. I couldn't see his whole face, just the lift of his head and the stillness. I don't like smoking near people who don't ask for it, and I didn't want to get into anything with him, so I went farther, past the tables to where the construction company keeps a yellow loader parked behind the fence, its bucket tipped down like a sleeping animal. I leaned against the side of it and lit the joint, and scrolled something I wasn't really reading. Music played soft from my phone. The air was cool enough to feel clean. That smell of hot metal you only get near machines clung to the bucket. I took a second drag and felt a wave run over me. Not panic yet, just that hair-lifting warning I usually ignore, because I don't want to live like that. I thumbed the music off and the quiet, thinned gravel hissed, quick and dry, and a little puff of grit tapped my calf like breath. I swung around. A figure was already close and reaching. The hand open, large enough to look wrong in that light. I saw a mouth held open, and teeth that didn't seem to fit the expression. The eyes were wide and too dark to read. He made a sound that was more in the throat than in the mouth, like someone working up a word that never comes. I went backward and lost my balance, and caught myself on my palm. Grit bit into my hand. The joint dropped and burned a small star into the dust and went out. I stood and ran, the breath tearing up fast in my chest like paper. I threw a look over my shoulder, and in that small mistake I saw him again. Hat brim low, dingy, hair long and the wrong color for the skin I could see. He was tall. He had ground on me as easy as stepping across a room. The first entrance to my building was closer. It's the one with the double doors that open slow, like they have to think about it. Inside, it's only the elevator, and waiting in there with a man felt like lining up my own bad luck. I passed it. My knee twinged when I pushed hard into the turn. I could hear him behind me. That same throat sound. No word, just pressure, like someone forcing air through a blocked reed. I cut along the side of the building toward the back entrance. 2 single doors there, one to a small vestibule, and one straight into the stairwell that smells like dust and mop water and old paint. It's the door I use when my hands are full of groceries. I had the code in my fingers before my brain had it. Numbers beep beep beep. Another set of steps cut in from the alley that runs behind the dumpsters. Fast and flat-footed, coming straight to the same door. A second man. Taller or maybe just longer. He moved like he had somewhere to be. He was making the same sound. Not a word. A gnash of breath. The first door gave. I pulled it in, squeezed through, and shoved it closed with my shoulder, and held it until the lock caught. The vestibule handle was cold enough to squeak against my skin. A face hit the glass in the same instant. It spread there for a second. Long hair, overalls, those busy eyes, the mouth working, teeth knocking the pain with a little click that vibrated under my skin. I turned and pulled the second door, and took the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't feel my legs. I felt my lungs shiver, and the edges of my vision go soft. I didn't hear anyone in the stairwell. Logic said I would have heard them if they were there. Fear said I didn't know what I'd hear. When I reached my floor and made the hall turn, I fumbled the key twice. The knob bruised my knuckles when I missed. A stupid small ache. Inside, I slid the chain home, turned the deadbolt, and put my weight against the door, as if that mattered. My partner, who I'd asked to come out with me, and who had said he was fine, sat up in bed and said my name without a question mark. I couldn't get a sentence out yet. I went to the window and then crouched under it, then stood, then crouched again because I didn't know which way safety was. The van was across the street, half in the dark between streetlights. It looked black or blue or both, the way some paint turns in shadow. The engine wasn't loud, so I don't know if it was on. I watched through the strip of space between the sill and the bottom of the blind. 3 men walked the sidewalk along the building, the 2 from the lot, and one I hadn't seen yet. They had flashlights they didn't handle well, beams skating low and quick. catching the seam of the foundation and making a thin hum on the glass, the way cheap bulbs do. One of them lifted a beam up into the next set of windows. It made the glass pale and the blinds glow. I ducked even though I knew they couldn't see me there. The glow moved to the next window, then the next. I called the building manager and left half the story on his voicemail. He sent a text to the building list, his words coming back on my phone as if I'd called them into existence. My heart pounded hard enough to miss beats. I pulled on my inhaler and tasted the sweet chemical and the ghost of plastic. I called the police and told the dispatcher 3 men had followed me, that there was a van, that they were outside with lights. She told me to stay away from the window. She said they'd send someone. She asked about weapons. I said I didn't see any and realized I hadn't looked for that. Hadn't looked for anything but eyes and teeth and hands. A siren sounded far off, one long smooth arc across the neighborhood. And the men moved quick. The beams jittered and went away. The van swung out and left with its lights off for half a block before they came on, when the cruiser turned onto our street a minute later. The night looked exactly the same as it had 15 minutes before, just cleaner, like it had been wiped. An officer took my statement in the hallway, pen quiet against a small notepad, the kind they all seemed to carry, and said they'd do another slow pass. He looked at the empty street, then at me, and made a note. He did not say anything about finding a van that matched the description. I slept and didn't sleep. Every time the building breathed a pipe settling, someone turning over, the elevator cable tapping, I braced for a hand on a door I couldn't see. I told myself they wouldn't come back because they didn't know the side entrance. I told myself I'd gotten lucky, and luck was a thing I had to stop counting on. In the morning, the food trucks were back, and a kid ran the hose over the tables and pushed a circle of mud around a drain. The string lights were off, and the lot had that cleaned-up morning smell. Water on dust, metal warming in sun. I went down to check for my lighter like an idiot who believes in small returns. I found a crescent of ash near the loader, and a dark smear where the joint had burned itself out. Gravel always looks disturbed if you want it to. Later, I asked one of the guys who sleeps near the bus bench if he'd seen anything. He shook his head, blinked slow, said no, but he had seen a dog get loose from a car and circle the block like it knew a trick. He laughed once, and it died in his throat. I thanked him anyway and felt like I'd asked the wrong question of the wrong person. By afternoon, I could stand at the window like normal, with my chest moving right and no tightness behind my eyes. People carried groceries. A bike messenger dragged one foot as he waited for the light to change. A package van double parked and left its hazards on, and the driver jogged, keys jangling. The street returned to itself, which is to say it pretended it had never been anything else. That night I used the front entrance and took the elevator up with a woman from the 3rd floor who smelled like shampoo and wind. He nodded and didn't speak. The doors closed at their same old pace. They always have. After I washed my face and set my phone on the nightstand, I checked the deadbolt with my thumb, then set the chain, then touched the chain again and felt the small give of the hinge. The hallway light cut under the door and drew a straight line across the floor. A thin seam that didn't blink, and a draft from the vents moved it by nothing you could measure. I watched it until my eyes gave out, and I slept. In the morning, the line was gone, and the door still held. I went alone the day the sky looked rinsed clean, the kind of dry brightness that shows every smear on the windshield. My brother had already moved out of state, and the place we used to hike together 15 minutes from our house had been sitting in my head like a song I couldn't shake. I don't usually hike by myself. 19 and cautious, I told myself it was just a walk, and that the air would help. The drive was quick, out of the suburb grids and past the last small storefronts. Then trees shouldering close on either side. The green thickened the nearer I got to water. At the lot, I parked under thin shade, took my backpack, clicked the locks. The place could have held 50 cars, but only a handful sat there. Warmed by the sun, past the cinder block restrooms, and the rusted trash cans near the day use signboard. The river showed itself in pieces through the shrubs like metal laid on its side. I kept landmarks vague on purpose and didn't check the map kiosk. To my left, I caught sight of tents pitched across the stones and driftwood, the kind meant to stay rather than pass through. Smoke laced the air. I went right so I wouldn't disturb them. The trail tracked the river, close enough to hear the riffles and the soft clink of small stones rolling in the current. The first quarter hour went easy, then more. My legs remembered the pace we used to keep. Cottonwoods leaned over the path, their leaves making a dry, agreeable sound. Gravel gave way to packed dirt in places, and the river kept its steady glass clink sound as stones rolled under the surface. Somewhere across the water, a dog barked once and fell quiet. It took longer than it should have for the awareness to land. I was alone. The knowledge didn't arrive as a thought so much as a tightening in my hands. I stopped where the path widened, and a stump made a seat. I drank from the bottle and slid my pocket knife from the backpack. It lived there for pulling thread and slicing fruit. Little things. It was thumb warm by the time I closed my hand over it. I took off my light jacket and folded it across my arm, and covered the knife without planning to. A habit surfaced, a small one. I bit at a dry piece of skin near my thumb, and tasted copper. It was enough to make me put my hand down. I turned back the way I'd come. The river made its same noise. The wind pulled a strand of hair into my mouth, and I pinched it free. When the lot must have been a few turns away, I saw the older man from the camp step onto the trail ahead. Late 40s, maybe older. He'd called to me earlier asking if I had a cigarette. I hadn't, then or now. He stepped out where a side path cut in from the gravel bar. We saw each other, and there was a beat where neither of us spoke. He lifted a hand like greeting and started toward me. Not fast, but steady. "Hey, you want to come hang out?" he asked when we were close enough. His voice was rough but not loud. The tents were behind him, a pale gray and sun-bitten blue against the gravel. I could see a camp chair tipped on its side, and a cooler with the lid askew. "I can't," I said, and shifted my weight to keep moving. "I need to get back home." He nodded like he'd heard me, then asked for my number. It came out casual, like a joke that tried to feel harmless on the way out. He moved a half step closer and his fingers found the hem of my tank. He didn't tug hard, he just held it, a clutch that bunched the fabric in his hand. The heat of his knuckles came through. I smelled river algae and something stale, like a shirt left damp too long. "Sorry," I said, because it was the first word that rose. "I'm not interested." The jacket slid a little off my arm, exposing my wrist and the dull metal in my palm. I didn't raise it. I didn't threaten. The knife was there the way a wall is there, a boundary named by its existence. He kept his hold a few seconds more without yanking or pulling me off balance, like his hand hadn't decided what to do. Then it did nothing. A jay called twice from the trees, went quiet, and the pause seemed to lengthen the few inches between us. I saw something cross his face that wasn't readable, like he'd done math and come up with two answers. He let go. The fabric fell flat again against my stomach. He looked past me toward the water, then back and stepped aside without speaking. I walked. Not a run. Not at first. Just the pace you keep when you want to look unbothered. When the restroom building came into view, I shortened my steps, then lengthened them again, a stutter my body didn't mean to do. My car shone like a tin toy in the sunlight. I set the bottle in the cup holder, checked the mirror, and pressed the locks again out of habit. I reached it with my keys already in my hand, and unlocked and got in and hit the button to lock again, all in one motion. My chest felt tight the way it does after a laugh that doesn't land. The wheel was hot under my palms. I put the knife on the passenger seat, blade closed, as if it needed air. Backing out, I saw the river through the gap between two trucks. The light on it, the sound I couldn't hear through the glass but still knew by heart. I didn't look to the left where the tents were. I didn't look at him. I pulled onto the road and drove past the trees that had been so green on the way in. My jacket slipped off the seat at the first turn, and I reached over at a stop sign to lay it flat. At the second light, I checked the doors again, though I knew they were locked. I don't know what would have happened if I had gone with them or if he had not let go. It sits in my memory like a rock on the riverbed. You can see when the water is low solid, not moving, with a trace of moss. Sometimes the sound of water from a lawn sprinkler slips me back there for a second, thin and steady, then it's just a yard again. I haven't hiked alone since. Sometimes when a day is clean and the drive would be short, I think of those 15 minutes from home to the trail. I think of the way the leaves sounded, like someone brushing their sleeve against a doorframe, and I let the thought pass. I was 23 and renting a narrow room on the second floor of an old boarding house just outside downtown. It was one of those wedge neighborhoods between warehouses and bars. I won't name the block. There are plenty like it here. The building had a tilted porch and a buzzer that stuck in damp weather. On good nights, I could hear the freight trains from the river and tell myself the sound was distant and harmless. A metal lullaby. That night, after a fight, I drove home with the radio off and the windows cracked for air. It was after 2. The city felt emptied out but not peaceful. Traffic lights ran their patterns for no one. I reached a red light and rolled to a stop. Another car slid up beside mine, the only other set of headlights in the world. I looked without thinking and met the driver's eyes. Reflex made me tip a small smile. It wasn't an invitation. I had been told to be friendly so long it sat in me like posture. The light changed. We went on. At the next light, he pulled even again. He turned his head and kept it on me. No expression. The kind of face you remember for what it didn't say. I felt the ache behind my eyes from crying and told myself I was imagining it. Then the next light, and the next. I went a block past my turn. Then 2. His car stayed with me as if we were hitched. I tried to shake him by weaving through the grid. I knew the diner with the metal stools, the pawn shop with the iron bars, the corner where a mural of a riverboat was flaking to powder. I took lefts I didn't need and looped around empty blocks. For a while his headlights vanished in my mirror, and I let out breath I didn't know I'd held. It was late. I was tired. I told myself he'd gone on to wherever he'd been headed in the first place. I turned toward the boarding house and found a tight space between a maroon sedan and a pickup. I parallel parked in a slow, careful way, hands at 10 and 2, backing and correcting until I felt the bump of my tire kiss the curb. I cut the engine. The street went quiet except for the compressor of an old refrigerator in the deli downstairs, and the tick of my cooling engine. The porch light of the boarding house was a weak cone on the stairs. I reached for my bag, and that's when his car glided in and stopped so close along my driver's side, nose slightly past mine, his rear tire pressed to the curb, that I couldn't have cracked the door an inch. Even in reverse, I had no angle. My door pinned, my front boxed by his fender. My body went cold in the clean way of a switch flipped. He had followed me home. Now he knew where I lived. I thought about sliding over the gear shift and scrambling out the passenger side. I pictured the distance to the front door, the lock that needed 2 turns, the key that sometimes snagged, the hallway light that often burned out, his hands on my jacket, easy as lifting a grocery bag. There weren't any people in sight, not even someone smoking on the steps 2 doors down. His engine idled, then stopped. I could hear the hot metal ping in his hood. I considered laying on the horn and counting on a porch light, but this strip sleeps through sirens. Noise felt like time I couldn't spend. I bent to grab my phone and knocked it off the seat. It slid under. My fingers brushed gum wrappers, a dime, the lip of the case, the simple things we do wrong when we need them right. I found the phone and dragged it out, and in that small lost moment he opened his door. He didn't rush. He walked around the nose of his car and came to my passenger side window, the one facing the sidewalk. He put his hand on the handle and pushed. It didn't give. He peered in at me close enough that his breath fogged a patch of glass. The same blank look, as if he had been waiting to recognize something in me, and never had. I hit the lock button again anyway. My thumb missed, then found it. I raised the phone and said I was calling the police. My voice came out too loud in the car. I tapped out 9, then 1, then 1, and the tone felt like I was dragging a rope through tar. Emergency came on the line, flat with purpose. I gave my street in the nearest corner, my breath too fast to keep the rhythm of the address. He started tapping the glass with 2 knuckles like he wanted me to hurry up and open. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was almost polite and made my stomach pitch. I told the dispatcher I was being followed, that he was outside my car at my passenger window, trying the door, that my driver's side was blocked and I couldn't get out. She asked me to repeat the cross street. He shifted from tapping to slamming his fist on the window and then on the windshield, pounding hard enough to make the glass thrum and flex. I flinched back. So far my shoulder hit the headrest. The horn went off because my palm pressed it by accident, and the sound broke the street open and then cut out. When I pulled my hand away, he stopped all at once. The quiet had weight to it. He leaned in, steady, like he was checking a measurement. He bent again and stared at me. Not angry, not excited, just fixed. His jaw moved once like he was grinding a small seed between his teeth. The dispatcher was still in my ear, steady, asking if I could safely start the car if I could drive away. I told her I was boxed in. My voice vibrated, and I tried to make it smooth. She said help was on the way. She told me to keep the doors locked and stay on the line. He stood there long enough for me to take in the particulars I didn't want. The seam of his coat shoulder, the scuffed leather at the toe of his shoe, the way his eyelids didn't blink as much as they should have. He straightened and let his gaze map the front, the clumped mailboxes, the bulky buzzer, those thin curtains upstairs, as if he were tracing a line he meant to remember. Then he broke off like someone had called time. He walked back around my car, got into his, and reversed fast enough that his tail end rose and fell. His headlights swung across the street, and the angles made the boarding house look like a set in a play. He drove away without looking back. I kept the phone to my ear and told the dispatcher he'd left. She asked if I could see his license plate. I said no. My breath began to catch up with me, the wheeze after a sprint when I'd been sitting still. I waited, watching my side mirrors like he might slide back in, repeat the scene because I'd imagined the part where he left. It had started to drizzle fine and almost invisible, but I heard it ticking on the hood. 2 patrol cars came without sirens but with their light bars throwing color on brick. For a moment they idled at the corner, radios murmuring, light bars washing red and blue over brick. Only then did doors open. I saw them before I heard the door closes. The officers didn't rush either. They talked to each other first. Then one of them approached my passenger side, and I unlocked the window enough to put it down an inch. He asked if I wanted to step out. I said no. He asked if I could describe the man. I said average height, mid to late 30s, dark jacket. I said the car was a dull blue or maybe gray. I said I had been crying and then scared, and the colors turned into each other. They took names and numbers, and a statement on a small clipboard with the back of a traffic citation tucked under to make a surface. The printer in the car whirred and spit something out. One of them looked at the front of the boarding house without making it obvious. He didn't like what he saw. That much showed in how his mouth tightened. He gave me a card in case I remembered anything else. I held it by the corner so my fingers wouldn't smear the ink, even though it didn't matter. After they left, I sat there a while with the engine off. I could have waited for someone else to come home and walk up with me, but I didn't trust a stranger to be safer than me alone. I counted to 30 and then to 30 again, and then I slid over the gear shift and squeezed out the passenger side. My bag clutched to my chest. The pavement was slick. I moved fast but tried not to look like I was moving fast. The boarding house door stuck like always, and I had to jiggle the key twice to get the deadbolt to catch, my shoulder against the wood. The stairwell smelled faintly of old coffee and someone's fried onions. On the landing a bulb had burned out, so the second floor was lit by the thin window over the alley. I went in and turned the lock and set the chain and then slid the little wooden wedge under the knob that the previous tenant had left, as if a sliver of pine could do more than the metal. I did not sleep. All night I watched the small slice of street I could see through the corner of the blinds, the way the rain ran into the gutter and made a thin sound. Every car that turned left at the end of the block made me sit up. I tried a trick my mother had taught me to slow my breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and I kept losing count. When the train started again before dawn, I felt some part of me unclench because a big known noise was louder than my thoughts. I told my boyfriend the next day and he said something like, "You should have driven to a station," and I said I didn't know where one was in that part of town. I kept a folded map in the glove box, but the kind that makes you pull over and spread it on your knees. I wasn't stopping for that. This was before a pocket map could talk back to you. The paper kind needs a flat surface in both hands. I got through the weekday by making lists of tasks and crossing them off in thick pen. By night, I watched the street again and memorized which porch lights were kept on and which blinds were always open, just a finger's width. The maroon sedan in front of my spot moved, then came back. The pickup on the other side got a new dent. The deli put out a chalkboard sign and then dragged it back in when the rain started. The police did not call me. Maybe they had too much to do. Maybe they found him or someone like him and told him to knock it off. Maybe they shook their heads and made the expression I had seen on the officer's face when he looked at the house. Some mix of annoyance and worry, like a pot left on the stove too long. What I remembered clearest was the certainty in the man's posture when he backed away, like he had finished what he came for, which was not me exactly, but the address. The feeling was that he had placed a pin in a map inside his head. I put a chair under the front knob of my room, and it never stopped looking like a joke. I learned the pattern of the mail carrier's footsteps, the way he took stairs sideways to save his knees. I kept my shoes by the bed, with the laces loose. I stopped putting on music after dark. I lasted a few months. That was as much as I could manage. When I left, I folded the wedge of wood into a newspaper and placed it in the kitchen drawer with the mismatched forks, and a single spoon for whoever would come after me and sleep under the thin walls. Downstairs, something clicked on and clicked off, the small machinery of the place reminding itself to keep going. I carried my boxes out in daylight. On the last trip, I took a long look at the street and counted the streetlights in both directions, so I would remember a thing that wasn't his. Then I locked the door and dropped the key through the slot, and listened to the hollow clack as it hit the floor inside. The sound was plain and final. I walked to my car and drove away slow, like leaving the scene of a small accident that only I had noticed. Wires. I notice small things most people skip: how a gauge settles, how a latch gives. The way an engine's hum tells the truth if you let it. My dad raised me around parts bins and solvent, a shop fan squeaking on hot afternoons. That habit of looking at the honest stuff might have saved me. We'd matched on an app and kept to messages for a while. He was polite, said he liked cars, said he had a Mustang he babied. I'd seen him before, in a neat button-down, coming in and out of my dad's store for targets. I used to shoot in a women's league, so I recognized faces, not names. He invited me to a concert at a county fairground on the edge of town, one of those multi-purpose lots with rodeo bleachers and portable lights you could see from the frontage road. Big crowd, plenty of security, wide lights throwing heat into the sky. It felt like a safe place to say yes. He picked me up just before dusk. The Mustang was clean inside, factory clean like a demo car. No extra gauges, no toggle strips under the dash, not even a phone mount for someone who talked builds. He kept it showroom plain. It read less like pride and more like a car staged to be looked at, not lived in. He slid in smooth, hands light, no smell of gas or oil, just a strong mint and cologne. We crossed town, joined the freeway, watched the exit numbers tick down. Right before the turnoff, he said the car was acting funny. I watched the tax. The idle was stable. The shifts were regular. No shudder in the wheel, no change in the tone of the exhaust. He told me he felt a hiccup. I didn't feel a thing. I said we could just limp it to the venue, which was less than a mile if we took the next exit. He nodded like that made sense, like I was the one guiding us, and kept us in the right lane. Inside the fence, security wanding people, laughter and popcorn, the crowd moving like a slow river. He kept buying drinks and handing them to me with a little smile. I didn't drink them. I held the cups for a while, made a face, said I needed the bathroom, and tipped them into the toilet one after the other, watching the foam spread like soap for a moment before it cleared. When I came back, he said I handled my drinks well. He said it twice. He watched my face. He tried to put his hand low on my back, and I stepped sideways like I'd remembered someone in the row behind us. On stage, the band was tight and the lights spun through the dust. It was the kind of night where you can forget you're just a person in a crowd. I didn't. I checked my phone now and then and saw the service hiccup. Out there, coverage ran thin. Text hung with the little bubble. When the last song ran down, I felt the old highway pull at me in the way it does when you've grown up around long stretches of two-lane and farm gates, where people sometimes stop for you. In the lot, he suggested the old road. I'd already thought of it and didn't like that he had too. The freeway ran hard and fast at night. The old two-lane paralleled it through fields, slower but kinder if you had to wave someone down. I nodded. The freeway would be a black rope of trucks. No shoulders to speak of, the wind grabbing at you. The old road ran slower over irrigation culverts and past the cemetery with its little white fence. If a car did fail, you could stand by a barbed wire line and people would see you. We were 10 minutes out when he said the car felt off. He eased it onto the gravel shoulder. The wind came through low and strong and smelled like cut alfalfa, that sweet damp scent that sticks to your clothes. The sky held its last gray light, and one bright planet showed itself. He popped the hood. I slid out and planted my sneakers in the grit and listened to the motor. It sounded like any other healthy V8, a soft, even rumble. He made a face, like he was searching for a sound. He told me I should wait in the car. He said I'd had a lot to drink. He said it was safer with the doors shut. He dropped a cheap slur about native folks and said a girl like me ought to sit tight. He didn't know me. He didn't know me at all. The hair at the back of my neck lifted. I checked my phone, one tiny bar blinked and went out and blinked again. I stepped away from the open hood like I was trying to find signal, and turned my body so I could see him in the triangular reflection under the hood. Crickets worked the edges of the field, a thin, steady file against the metal soft tick. When he thought I wasn't looking, he lifted a set of spark plug wires off the distributor cap and started switching them. He didn't hesitate. He went counterclockwise, moving each one a step off. It was practiced, a simple way to take a running thing and make it falter when you needed it to. I took a picture. It took 3 tries to send. The wind pulled at my hair. I could hear the hood creak when a gust caught it. My thumb fumbled on the screen. I missed one letter in my dad's name, and then corrected it. The message went through. The little delivered didn't show up. Then it did. He paused with his hand on the latch, as if listening for something in the engine that wasn't there, then walked to the passenger side and tipped the glove box open. The dome light came on, and I saw the gun first. He tilted the glove box toward me, like it was an accident. "No need to worry," he said, almost pleasant. "We're safe out here." He let the door thump shut. My phone lit up. One line from my dad, walking. I typed fast. I said where we were and that the car was fine and not fine, both at once. He told me to get moving, that he was on his way, that friends lived up the road. I told him the road was empty, and the nearest side road ended at a cemetery gate. He wrote back, "Keep walking." It was just 2 words. They looked bigger than they were. I told the man my dad was on his way, and that our friends were nearby. I said I'd flag them. I took a step, then another, and set my eyes on the dark ahead, where the old highway dipped and rose. He shouted something behind me about staying put. I said over my shoulder that the wind was too loud and I couldn't hear. It wasn't, but the sound of it came off the fields and got inside your ears. The ditch was shoulder deep, with cold water slicking the mud, and a skim of algae that made the bank greasy. The air there was cooler by a few degrees. I felt it through my wet jeans. I held still. The irrigation pipe was the big kind, ribbed like a barrel, the kind farm kids crawl through and come out laughing with dirt in their mouths. My steps turned to that fast walk that isn't running, and then dropped into a crouch in the weeds. The Mustang's light swept, a long white slice across the fence posts. I slid down the ditch wall and pressed my back to the dirt. The weeds moved in the wind and brushed my cheek. I tucked my hands under my thighs to stop them trembling. Up on the road, a beam from a handheld light skittered along the asphalt and down into the ditch's edge. He was moving slow, like he could hear me breathing. The light passed over a beer can and made it flare. My phone buzzed in my pocket like a fly. I held still and counted to 20 by squeezing my eyes. The beam slid over the ditch wall and wandered off. My breath hitched once. The lights moved past. The sound of the engine changed as he rolled slow, the gravel popping under the tires. When the sound faded, I pulled myself up the bank. My jeans were wet at the knees. I took the weeds as cover and kept to the fence line. The night out there didn't have many colors, mostly black and rusty brown, with the white of the fence posts and the pale ribbon of the road. The planet in the sky was brighter. My phone buzzed again. See you. I looked up and saw 2 headlights far back, steady and small, not sweeping, just growing. I walked harder. My shoelace had come undone at some point and it smacked my ankle. I tied it too tight and kept going, thinking how people always think they'll run cool in a moment like this. But mostly you just fumble and your breath gets loud. I tried to pocket the phone and missed, almost dropped it into the weeds. I caught it against my thigh. The truck slowed beside me, and I knew the shape of it before I could see my dad's face. I stepped out from the weeds too fast, and almost turned my ankle in a hole. He braked, rolled the window down, and I climbed in. The cab smelled like coffee, gun oil, and the old leather bench. He didn't say anything for a few beats. He handed me a towel and I wiped the ditch water off my hands. I told him about the spark wires and the drinks and the glove box and the words the man had used. I kept my voice even like I was reading from a manual. He kept his eyes on the road. He said okay once, not like he was agreeing, just like he'd heard me. Closer to town, cruiser lights bounced off the ditch grass and fence posts. His car was canted on the shoulder. Officers were busy. None of them looked our way. The man stood off to the side, hands high, his jaw working like he had gum in it. He didn't look at us. My dad kept driving. He told me not to worry about what happened there. He told me to breathe. Later, someone I knew told me he'd had past charges for hurting people, that he'd been picked up that night for carrying concealed without the right paperwork. No one from the police called me. The man didn't show up around town after that. It's a small place and people remember cars. I thought about the wires and how easy it would have been to take that trick and make it look like bad luck. I thought of the ditch and the way I pressed my back into the mud, and how it took a minute for my hands to stop shaking even with the towel. People say be careful. They say use your head. What helped me wasn't just caution. It was knowing the small workings, the order a motor breathes in, the way a steady idle hums through your feet, and how a single wire in the wrong place can turn certainty into a stall. I'm not saying to memorize every car diagram. I'm saying find the little things that are knowable and put them where you can reach them. When I got home, I took my shoes off by the door and set them side by side like I always do. There were bits of grass stuck to the laces. I set the shoes heel to heel like parts in a tray, left the laces loose so they wouldn't tighten and hold the mud. I let the towel hang on the chair to dry. The house was quiet, the way houses get quiet when everyone is waiting for you to come in. In the morning, I rinsed the mud from the cuff of my jeans and hung them over the tub. The sun through the small bathroom window made a rectangle on the tile. I watched it move a little, and then I went to make coffee,